Hey everybody, this is Zaharia and welcome to our new series on Awesome Africans. It's all about sharing great conversations with amazing and interesting people that are making conscious efforts to create better futures for themselves and the people around them just by being their authentic selves and living their truth. And it's brought to you by the African Futures Academy. We're all about creating spaces for the youth in Africa to explore themselves and the problems they want to solve to create more equitable, conscious futures for all. Today we have a special guest, Mark Shawa. Mark Shawa calls himself a teacher, a thinker, and is about all things inspirational. He's all about creating safe spaces, being authentic, and growing together. And I think that's how we got in touch, right, on LinkedIn. I mean, our work resonated with each other, and we kind of
100%.
connected on that way. And yeah, so the African Futures Academy basically has come up with a list of 21 future skills that we think are going to take Africa and redefine the way we go into the future, move us and shift us off that trajectory that we've been on for the last, thousands of years and put us somewhere where we really want to be. And one of the fundamental things that we're teaching is conscious leadership. And I think that's, where we really resonate with you and the way you think about things. And today we're just having those conversations about, what you're about, what you think, what
Okay.
you have to offer, and what you have to share with us. We need more role models for the kids in Africa. We don't always want to take the ideas of overseas countries and their technology and their ideas because we have a different context, we have different problems, and we have a different culture. So let's
100%.
start. Okay, so who is Mark Shawa and what do we need to know about you?
Okay. Firstly, thank you, Zahara, for actually inviting me. I didn't know this was episode one. So this is going to be quite funny, how to do
We'll wing
this. So
it,
most of
we'll
my,
wing it. So
we'll wing it. This is conversational, and I love it. So who is Mark Shaw? That's a very interesting one. So before I actually answer that question, let me give you a little bit of context of how Mark Shower became to being Mark Shower. I mean, I grew up, born in Zambia. So born in Zambia, did most of my primary in Zambia, and then at the age of 11, I went to Zimbabwe to finish off my primary and also finish off my high school, and then went back to Zambia to do my A levels, and then came to South Africa. And in that time, during school holidays, I was staying in Botswana. So you can imagine the number of African countries I had to circulate through. And in all of that, I always needed to adapt or assimilate so that I can be able to feel accepted or feel welcomed by the people that I'm around. So, like how the saying goes, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And that actually caused a little bit of an identity crisis for me because one, every country I went to, because of my accent, everyone is like, Mark, are you from America? And I'm like, no, I haven't even set foot in America. I'm not trying to go there, especially during this period of time. And funny enough, I'd always had to tell them I'm not American, I'm Zambian. And even in Zambia, same thing. They would ask me, they'd be like, are you from Zambia? Which part? And I'm like, I'm from Lusaka, born in Kitwe. But no one would really believe it because I don't seem to fit the status quo of what I assume a Zambian must look like or a Black African man must look or sound like. So I never managed to fit. So that gave me a bit of an identity crisis. And it had been a battle for me. And as of 2020, I began, so it's actually 21st of December 2019 when I first saw my psychiatrist, because the first thing she asked, she's like, why are you here? And I said, I don't know who I am when I look in the mirror. I don't know who I'm looking at. So how am I able to tell people about stuff and share my truth when I don't even know who I am? So that began my journey of one, healing, also about self introspect, and just learning to forgive myself for those past times where I felt like I had to assimilate, but I never really felt like I was being my authentic self. And with time and support from, I've got a life coach, amazing person. I've got an amazing digital strategist who is extremely conscious about the work that she does. And in all of that started helping me think differently and ask questions. I've always been curious. I've always been the type to say, why do we copy and paste models from a European, Western, or an Asian perspective when we have a different context in Africa? And the other question that always rose for me, and this comes from being a Zambian in South Africa, is, when we hear about the xenophobic attacks, and I'm like, why are we fighting each other? And yet we come from the same continent. Why do I need a visa to go to Morocco, and yet it is within Africa? So these questions would come up to me, and I'm like, where did we lose it? At what point did us as Africans lose it? And I guess for me, what resonated was, Mark, you need to understand your root so that you can be able to identify who you are. And I learned that, sometimes I may not have access to my exact roots, because I have asked my family, where does my surname come from? There's history of it, even in India, Malawi, like it's far out. The tribe I'm in Zambia, comes all the way from, its heritage is from the Zulu nation, actually. So funny enough, I'm in South Africa, and then I'm like, oh wait, my tribe is actually from this country. But as I started doing that, I started realizing that you need to create the identity that you want to envision, because times are different. We're living in a technological age where information is not readily available, especially African history, because we were storytellers. We are storytellers. So most of our history has been given through word of mouth instead of written in textbooks. So you find we will struggle, obviously, to find stuff unless someone has spoken it and it's gone down. And with that, brought about Mark, who now reflects as, or identifies as, Mark the African, Mark the Zambian, because I believe that one, Africa is the birthplace of humankind. So I am a descendant of humankind. Africa is the birthplace of creativity. If the first signs of humans is here in Africa, it means I have the power to create. And I thought about it, and I was like, why can we not all be on that wavelength as Africans? In as much as we have differences in cultures, differences in our perceptions, why do we make it seem as if one must be right or wrong? Instead, we are interconnected and appreciate the differences, and learn from those differences. So like at the moment, I want to make an assumption that you're Muslim.
Yes.
Right? So I'm raised Christian. However, I have different views as well, because I ask myself, and I'm like, before Christianity came to Africa, what were Africans doing? you know so it's one of those, I'm always questioning and saying certain things can coexist. I can appreciate um Islam the same way I can appreciate Christianity, because if we really look into it on a fundamental and principle level, there is a golden thread that ties religions together. But humans at the end of the day also do introduce error into certain things. They get lost in their way, and it's not always their fault. Things happen in life, and I think it's the same thing with Africa. It's not our fault entirely, but we need to own up to some of the things where we feel we made mistakes. And for me, I learned that through acknowledging my own mistakes, and times when I hurt people through my own actions. I was selfish, and I realized that if I want to heal, I need to acknowledge the mistakes. I need to be able to acknowledge that I hurt people with my actions, whether intentionally or not. And in that process, getting closer to selflessness and being more conscious and aware of who Mark is when he comes to people. And that is how I began speaking more and more about who I am, my truth. And I'm unapologetic about it. I'm like, look, I'm African. I won't just say like I'm African, I am Zambian, but in some way or some form, I connect with other Africans. Doesn't matter what race, culture you're from. We have something in common, and if we come together, um, and we make safe spaces for each other, we can actually be the pioneers. Because I mean, if the beginning of the world started here, then why are we not pioneers? And these are questions that go through my head. So I don't know if I've answered the question, but I've said a lot. So at the end of
Yeah.
the day, Mark Shawa is the African who has come about through healing, come about through trusting himself, and come about to say that my life is of servitude, first to my Africans, and then to the world.
I love that what you said. Everything you said is resonates so much with me, and what we actually trying to do here. And I'm glad this is the first episode, because it sets the
So now
tone.
we're setting the tone. I'm
Yes,
now like,
setting a tone. Yeah, it's all about, all this difficulty you went through and helped you to find yourself. And that's what it's about, becoming more conscious as Africans so that we can go into the future and create what we want. So all of the things you mentioned, I just, I love it. But you mentioned something, Mark is the African. What does that mean, actually? What does it mean to be African?
oh, that's a big one. So for me, I'll give you my perspective, and I guess I'll reiterate. For me, meaning African is community. That's one thing. Big thing I've seen is in all the countries I've been in within Africa, there's always a sense of community. And for me, being raised, it's kind of like the neighbor who is not your blood is still part of family because the community raises the child so that they can get the child to the next level. So for me, being African really shows, or being African is about building each other. Being African is about creating futures for the next generation. Being African is really about understanding the knowledge and the power we have currently, that it is not just for me to keep it, but it's actually for me to give it, to pass it on. And that's where storytelling came. When we look at African history, and I mean, depends on how far back we can go. A lot of stuff was done through storytelling. A lot of stuff was done through painting. So that's why we find paintings in caves and the like, because as Africans, we want to picture and envision a future that is beyond that which we currently are living. So for me, it's the same, where being African is about building each other, creating the future for the next generation, even in as much as we may not be the ones who see it now. But we have the knowledge that we have now and we pass it on. And yeah, that's really how I see it.
I love it. Everything you're saying just resonates so much with me. And exactly why we created this platform, to create those conscious futures for the African context. And we're at a point now where it's so necessary, and there's so much of chaos happening, with everything coming to a head, with technology, with this pandemic, with everybody kind of waking up and seeing all the cracks in the system. And one of the most important things we think we need is conscious leadership. And I know you resonate very deeply with that.
Yeah.
So maybe tell us a little bit more about your perspective on what conscious leadership looks like, or what it is.
So conscious leadership for me, and these are not my words, but these are words from someone who I've connected with through LinkedIn. And he had been told that he's a motivational speaker. And he disagreed with that statement. He said, I'm not a motivational speaker, I'm a motivational listener. So the dynamics already shift, because leading is a form of servitude. So when I think of conscious leadership, it means you listen more than you speak. Why? Because you really want to understand how to take I want to say the community or the tribe that has been given to you, whether it be by the universe or whoever, corporate, or doesn't matter what you believe. How do you best serve them? You can only start to serve them if you can hone into the skill of listening. And that is a conscious decision. Um, the same gentleman also mentioned to me that, it's easy. A lot of people listen to respond back, but very few listen to just listen. It's either they want to respond back or they want to cure or remedy something. And I think it's a very difficult skill. I will not lie, it's still something that I struggle with, still something that I am learning to do, where am I able to just listen for the sake of listening? I'm not trying to give answers, I'm not trying to share my side of the story or how I relate, but it's just listening, so that one, I can be present. So conscious leadership as well for me is about being present and being aware, about the people that you serve. So I think maybe the word lead has really misled us. That sounds funny. So leading has misled us, because when we think of lead and leaders from a dictionary perspective, it's talking about being ahead, being in front, right? But if you change the narrative and we say conscious servants or conscious servitude, it's very different. because servitude means you're getting your hands dirty. Servitude means that you're paying particular attention to what exactly is needed, you know, and hence that changes even one the loyalty that you get back, the contribution that you get back from the community that you're actually leading. So yeah, conscious leadership for me is it's servitude at its best. You need to learn to die to self. And funny enough, I went through that period of finally understanding what dying to self means. Like it's a difficult thing to do because it's not a one day thing. It's an everyday decision to say that my life is not mine. My life is to use all the skills and tools that I have to serve others so that I can contribute towards creating a better future. And I think one part which is unfortunate is I believe a lot of African leaders started with that. I mean, when we think of liberation, it was because they wanted equality. When we think of independence days, I mean, Zambia got its independence in 1964, and at that time we had Kenneth Kaunda, who was one of the four fighters, and he wanted a brighter Zambia. You know, after independence, we all asked the question, where did it go wrong? What changed? And possibly it's also not having the right support as a leader. You need to understand that you're not alone, even when you're a leader. You need to be conscious that a leader needs someone who's beside them, not just someone, but they need a support structure as well. And they need to be able to listen to people who may not be in that high position with a voice that will be heard by masses, but still contributes well enough to say that you as the leader are not seeing this. I'm on the ground, but your voice is the one that's heard, and you're the influence at the end of the day. So leaders need to, the African leaders, I think one part they've struggled is the bi-directional learning, and being able to say that I will take learnings from even people who are younger than me. And a big contribution to that, which I've had on a personal level, is our culture. I think African culture and even Asian culture, where if someone is older, you keep quiet. You don't look at them in the eye when you speak. You keep quiet. And that is for them, that's their form of leadership. But what we need now is more people who are willing to come down to the level of someone who may not have that vast years of experience, but still in what they say, there is something you can get to learn. And just keeping that bi-directional relationship of learning from each other.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, you mentioned that quite a few very, very important things like listening, right? And I think, this whole thing about conscious leadership, you have to basically go through this process to become more conscious yourself and listen to yourself to become a leader. It's not something you can just go to business school and learn how to be a
No.
leader. It's a very different time that we're in. And that's, why things are crumbling, I think, because there's such a disconnect between human consciousness and what we need to do versus all these structures we've created in society to have this management and leadership kind of roles that don't fit. Yeah, so definitely a lot of self work I think needs to be done right now.
Yeah. There's a lot. It's funny you mentioned self work, and I mean, given I personally feel as if the pandemic was the universe's way of saying we need to slow down and see all the cracks that are there, because I've had multiple conversations with people, and everyone is going through something. Even with my psychologist, when I was speaking with her, one thing she mentioned that the pandemic has done is that it has removed all those layers of distraction that we put, whether they be healthy or not. It has peeled them off like an onion. And now you're left with just that little part, which is so fragile that anything that touches it, you literally implode. And it's shown the cracks and the gaps, and it's made us realize that the things we thought and treasured may not necessarily be what matters anymore. Like simple things like being able to meet face to face. We don't have that opportunity anymore. Well, look, we're on level 2 now, we can do it, but when we were at level 5, you had to stay home, only going out for what you call essential goods, meaning even particular food types are not there. It's not deemed essential. And you just sit and wonder, what if these essential food types were accessible way before the pandemic to everyone?
Mm.
It would have changed a lot of things. But however, we've seen the gap in inequality because of that. What someone deems as essential, what someone deems as a luxury is completely different. It's very subjective, but then the government then said this is essential. So you can't just buy any type of food, because you enjoy it. No, you have to buy the food which sustains you and which can be bought, quite often, and also cost margin and whatever. It just showed the gap that was there, and it exposed a lot of things, and it meant that there's a lot of stuff that needs to shift. I don't want to say change because change always sounds extremely dynamic, but I want to say shift because it's shifting is really small. It's micro behaviors that you work on, and it's iterative. So it's not a change, but it is a shift in consciousness and what you start to perceive as, or what you deem important versus what's not as important as you used to hold it.
Yeah.
So I count it as a blessing, but also, still put into mind that there are families that have been affected by the pandemic. And they are unfortunate to be in that. I mean, I've got my sister who's a doctor, so she's in the front line, and it's extremely difficult because she's one of the people who's most exposed. So for me to even see her, it's always a risk.
Mm.
It's always a high risk in comparison to me going to the shop. So always it makes you realize how precious and how vulnerable life is, and that we really need to take care of humans more than just trying to advance technology. It's like, how do we make sure no one is left behind?
Yeah, we've had to learn new ways of being on the world, on the planet, and I think it's exposed us to a lot of inequalities, a lot of issues with the systems we've created thus far. And we have to make the conscious decision not to take these broken things into the future. We have to create
Mm,
new ways of doing things. And, I think it's just about also just learning new things all the time. I mean, there's so much things happening here that are constantly changing, different things coming into our lives, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's technology, whether it's new levels of consciousness, or whatever issues are happening. People have to be dealing with these things on an ongoing basis, and it's causing a lot of stress and anxiety. And as
mm,
human beings, we've got to learn new ways of coping, new ways of being, new things all the time you know
yeah.
and that's another thing. You say you're a teacher, and I mean, not in the classroom, but like, what is lifelong learning is a thing. It's a very, very important thing for us, and I'm glad
Yeah.
we embody that.
It's funny you mentioned that. So I'm currently doing my master's, right? And my it's on pause because of COVID. So I'm going to continue my dissertation next year. But last year I did the coursework. And one of my classmates asked me a really important question, which at that time, I guess I wasn't so conscious about why I'm doing my master's. So I had this vision in my head that one day I'm going to be a lecturer, and that allows me to be an actual teacher. So I mean, gone through academia. And my classmate actually asked me, why do you need a master's to be a teacher? And I froze. I was like, it's recognized, you need to have a master's now. And he's like, and he was like, but you don't have to be in a classroom to teach, because knowledge is the application of what you've acquired, and you keep on applying it, and anyone can be your student, as long as they're ready. um and as long as you can share your knowledge, automatically you become a teacher. you know Not everyone is your student, but whoever does listen essentially learns from your teachings, which really did get me towards creating my rawcast, which is just journey with Mark, talking about my own experiences, and really it's just like, I'm the best person that can tell my story, but in that, I'm not looking for a particular set of audience. I'm like, whoever listens, if one person's journey meets my journey somewhere and they resonate, that's really all that I want. That's all that I need. That's all that fulfills me. And the more I share what I've experienced, my hope really is that Other people can be able to look and be like, oh wow, I'm also going through this, I'm not the only one. And I think that shared experience in our individual journeys is what gets us to connect. It may be in different contexts, it may be in different cultures, but that shared experience is so critical to connecting. And it's even the reason why you and I connect. um, I mean, it's in the post that you talk about consciousness on LinkedIn, and for me it's the same narrative. I have not known you for like 20 odd years, but through that I've understood what you stand for, and why you want it. And I'm more than willing to contribute, because I'm like, that just cause it's not about us, it's bigger than us. And same thing with my story, is that it's not about me, I'm just sharing my story, but it's bigger than me, and just hoping that people can learn from it. I'm not saying that my story is law. If I implemented one, two, three, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You need to find your own working formula. But if you think that this is helpful for you, run with it. Take it or run with it, apply it. If it doesn't work, you've learned a lesson that what Mark said doesn't work for me. And you go and find another teacher. And that's really how I've now found myself to actually embody being a teacher now.
And I think that's so important, everything you just said, that, we are all like on this journey, on these paths, and trying to tell our narratives. And I think there needs to be more African narratives made visible, and technology can help us to do that. And we are all teachers and students of each other, so we need to have those voices heard. We need people to be sharing their stories and get back to telling, all these things and what's going on in their lives and what happened. And we can learn so much from that. It's such an important thing that we've been missing for so long. We've been bombarded with things from the media that are outside our experience and outside our context, and we need to start being the ones to share now, what's actually the story.
100%. I still feel like the story of Africa is made like a dark continent. And I think I get extremely sad, because I'm like, why is Africa considered a dark continent? And yet everybody seems to want a piece of Africa. There's no way that you'd be attracted to darkness. It just doesn't make sense. It just means that there are gems that are in Africa that you just don't want other people to realize. And that's one of the things I've seen, and it's like it's high time that we get into speaking our stories. I saw this video on LinkedIn of this Ugandan boy, and I did share it. He spoke so eloquently about Uganda. I think was Uganda or Gambia? No, Uganda. And he was like, everything is here. Like, we have the academics here in Africa, we have the platforms here in Africa. The only problem is that it's not being shouted so loudly. If us as Africans can be proud of what we do, we definitely need to shout about it. But I think something I've come to learn, and this is from my own personal experience, is within the African culture, and even Asian, there's quite a big similarity between African and Asian cultures.
Mm.
Is like life, you keep on going, you keep on moving. There's no time to celebrate. It's what's expected. So if you pass an exam, what else did you expect? Why are we celebrating what you're meant to have done? It's like, why are you clapping for a fish that is swimming? Fish is meant to swim. And it's in that light where I think we haven't gotten as Africa into the spirit of celebrating each other. And that has also caused competition amongst each other, because we don't have that spirit of celebrating the neighbor. It's more of keep your things on the low, because if you don't, the neighbor is going to do something against you. They're going to try to bring you down. That's the narrative that's always been there. So it's like you've had to keep your winnings or whatever you've achieved as a secret, and only share it with your inner circle. Um, and I'm like, that's such a bad narrative, especially in this day and age where there's a lot of kids. And I still consider myself as a kid, even though I'm 29 years old. I still consider myself I actually call myself a kid out. I keep the kid aspect and I keep the adult aspect, and I'm like, I don't want to lose the two. I should still be curious like a kid, but have tact like an adult as I'm growing. And yo, I think I lost my train of thought. Wow,
You're
that
a
was
kid
not
out.
right.
You're a kid out. It's okay. We still get you.
Yeah, so it's when I think of kids, kids would celebrate every little thing that they do. Like if their tooth is about to come out, they're gonna run and show their parents, "But look, my tooth is coming out," you know. But now when you grow up into society, it's like you can't overly show off your talent, because you're going to be threatening someone's position, or someone is going to be looking is going to be trying like have a hit on you or something like that. And I'm like, why is that narrative like that? Why can we not all try to contribute? Why can we not all try to pull each other into the same space? Kids need these stories told. They need to know that it's okay to make mistakes as when you're growing up. What matters is, are you conscious enough to reflect on those mistakes and learn the lesson that comes with it? And are we as adults able to support them as they grow? I've got a 4-year-old son, and it's so different when I think of the dynamics between myself and my father and how I was taught, and how I now have to relate with him because he's such a curious kid. And I'm like, he's the person who wants to talk and negotiate. You can talk about bedtime and you have to negotiate about bedtime. My era, there was no negotiation. You knew if it's 8 p.m., if you are not in bed, okay, the belt is coming out, you're in trouble. For him, he doesn't understand that. For him, that is pain, that is negative reinforcement. But however, if you say that, okay, fine, let's do this, we need to make a trade. So if you're going to sleep late, it means that you're going to read more books the next day. And he has to now look at it and he'll be like, okay, I like reading books, but I also like staying late. But I don't want to read too many books because my concentration span is not that much. So I will sleep early so that I don't have to read too much. Or I'll sleep late and read the books that I want. And I'm like, well, like, pick the books you want to read. We won't pick them for you. You pick the books you want to read. And you can already see the dynamics are different. It's a conversation, whereas before it really was a top-down, like a corporate authoritarian approach. And it just shows the difference in the leadership. And can we blame our parents for that? No, we can't. It's what they knew and learned. And even the same with us. If our kids at some point when they're older, they'll probably look at us and just be like, oh my God, I can't believe that mom and dad were doing this. And would they blame us? Most likely, but are they conscious enough to say that this was how they were raised, but they're also of listening spirits. So if I share my truth, they're willing to listen. And that's what other kids need to hear, that it's okay to be able to make a mistake. It's okay to be able to voice your opinion without feeling as if someone's going to judge you, without feeling as if you don't fit the status quo, without feeling as if you are rebellious. It's so normal that you need to assimilate to society just just because your truth doesn't fit the 98% that the world sees. And it's a sad thing for Africa. It's really a sad thing. We've been crippled in that manner, and our voices have been silent. And I think for me, I just said, I'm tired of being quiet. I'm like, I'm tired. Also, I'm sharing my story. So I mean, you can fight me, but I'll be like, hey man, my story is an opinion piece. It's told by me. So even if you say that it's not true, I'll be like, it's what I experienced, and we can engage. I actually say that, why do you say it's not true? It gives me an opportunity to engage, um, which is, again, consciousness and awareness, really. I feel like I've said a lot. Wow.
Yeah, you have. I think you've touched on some very, very important things, like the narratives that created that were around when our parents or our grandparents were alive, and how they've passed that on to us. But like you said, it's not their fault. Part of that narrative was in the context of lack, of poverty, of oppression, of all of those things that governed our lives on this entire continent for so long. And I think only now we're starting to get out of that. And
Mm,
as that is changing, so too is our consciousness and our awareness, and just listening to ourselves and being able to voice our own opinions and our sharing ourselves and our stories and changing that story. Being conscious parents is part of conscious leadership. Changing the way you raise your children and relate to them and listen to them. It's not something we grew up with, but we have to listen to what's coming from the future. And and take that and ride with that, just go into a new direction. I think that is so important.
Definitely. I definitely do agree on that. Just one question from my side.
Hmm.
So, what got you to be in this space?
So I've been working overseas for a long time, with lots of different companies and startups working in education, edtech, and I've always, felt like South Africa was difficult for me to move ahead in because of the racism, because of the structures we have here, and the lack of opportunities. But I said, I've learned so much. I need to bring all these fantastic things I'm learning about back home because there's so much potential here. There's so many people here. There's such a need for creative solutions. There's such a need for a new vision, a new way of thinking. And we can't take the solutions from, other countries and what they're doing there. People here have their own unique, you know, thing. They have a different spirit. And we just need to like create space for that. So this is what this project is about. The African Futures Academy is just about creating space for people in Africa to explore and then start creating their stories from there, just creating, because we never had that space before. Everything was so stifled, apartheid, racism. It just blocked everybody. Your entire mind, your consciousness, your being was restricted in every single way, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I think now is the time we need to change that. Yeah, so this is part of my mission, I guess.
Okay, okay. And it sounds it's extremely, what do I want to say? Extremely big. It's a big, big, big thing. But one thing I love about it is it's definitely bigger than just you.
Mm.
And I think, as you mentioned, this is a series, so being able to invite people of like-mindedness and being able to say that these are people who are able to bring this forward, we need to have their stories told. So this I think this platform, or your platform, and what you're doing is amazing for Africa, because something that I also want to do in my own life. But one thing I already even can think about personally is like, already I'm like, how do I contribute apart from this? How do I contribute? Because I think there is so much potential in South Africa. There's so much potential in Africa, and we can be able to show the world that, you know what, we do have this amazing light, and we can teach you a thing or a million things actually,
Yeah.
that we're capable of. I've got to connect with a lot of amazing people in the UK who, through my LinkedIn posts, have resonated with some of the African attire that I was like. As you can see, I've got my head wrap, my hoodie actually has got Ghanaian print. In the first question they gave me, everyone was like, Mark, why are you wearing a head wrap? Isn't it only for women? And I told them, I'm like, look, if you look at it from a just physical perspective, you're going to look at it as a head wrap. And for me, I'm like, it's a symbolism of my heritage as an African, because when I look back in the history, kings and queens in Africa wore crowns. There were different types of head wraps. When we look at cultures like Nigerian cultures, we look at cultures in Northern Africa. So we look at Morocco and the like, head wraps are an actual thing, but they symbolize something else. Unfortunately, the world has become so diluted, and they want to box everything and say that, what, if you're wearing a head wrap, it is for a woman. If it's a man, his hair must be cut short, and I'm like, there's symbolisms. Why do we not want to look at the symbolisms? And I think the future of Africa needs a new form of African philosophy that is, I think, essentially what was lost, because we never had it in texts. But new age African philosophies is really what's going to take us to our next level as Africans, because it's what we need to look at. And we learn from the historical events. Things were done in symbols. When we look at Egypt wrote in hieroglyphics. Those were symbols, so actual drawings. So you'll know that, okay, this is, the Sphinx. Oh, this is Nefertiti that they're talking about. But it's in those symbols, and what they mean is why the Egyptians would be so proud about their culture. Yes, you might write the stories of them in English, but they'll be like, no, in hieroglyphics, there's a particular meaning behind it. When I think of the Bible in the Christian context, original text was written in Hebrew and Arabic. After the translation, there was like that meaning and symbolism is gone. It's just read like the English definition, but you look at the actual original text, there's symbols. If you talk about breath, it's more than just saying breath. It's talking about giving life. And even the same with the Quran. It's exactly the same thing, where certain things which have the original text before they were translated, there's more deeper meaning behind it, which
Mm.
came from particular philosophies. And it's what we need definitely as Africans going forward, is what other philosophies we live by now, given that there's technology, um, given that there is scarcity of jobs. How do we change things? I was seeing something with Google now, and Google's doing is disrupting the traditional education system by creating a Google Academy where it's based on skills. And I'm like, that's actually brilliant. Because I think, again, African history, when you saw a carpenter, his whole family would be full of carpenters. Why? It's a skill that he would pass on from generation to generation, and they are known as the carpenters. They're known as the, whatever it may be. And it was all skill based. It was never a paper, and we're going back to that age. And I think as Africans, we need to understand that, what skills do we have here in Africa, based on based on the problems we're trying to solve. What skills do we need here in Africa? So I know one of your questions was talking about the fourth industrial revolution, and my response really was like, that narrative is thrown so often, and I guess it's the buzz thing that's going around. But I'm like, there are people in Africa that still don't have access to just clean water.
Mm.
So how is the fourth industrial revolution going to be a conversation when someone is just trying to get clean water? Someone is just trying to get basic shelter. And these are the real problems that we struggle with. People don't have formal homes to live in, and hence why we've got informal settlements in a big chunks of Africa. Do I think the fourth industrial revolution is going to be able to solve that? No. I think if we continue running in that light without actually addressing the basics, which are dependent on the philosophies of saying, what are the basic things a human needs? The fourth industrial revolution will really just go on top of a layer of issues. It's not going to change anything. You're just going to still advance the people who have access to the things. So like with me, I'm in a technological space. I mean, I've got a smartphone. So, I've got a smart TV. So when we think of fourth industrial revolution, it's going to definitely speak to me, because I'm like, how do I control my TV off my phone, or control my fridge, or whatever, you know, Internet of Things. But when you think to someone who still needs to walk 5 kilometers just to get water from a river, that conversation is not for them. So how do
But
we
here's the
talk
thing,
about
right? That's exactly my question, right? We have all this technology and all of these unmet needs. We need to close that gap.
it?
We need
100%.
to use the technology to bring everybody in Africa up to a living standard. We are
Yeah.
missing so many things. We have all the problems in the world, everything you can think of, infrastructure and everything.
Yeah.
Whatever you can think of, we have that problem to solve. And that's where creativity comes from, right? Solving all these problems.
100%.
So this is why we need to use this technology with the conscious leadership to solve these problems. It's
Correct.
not about, just advancing technology for the sake of it and creating unnecessary things in the world. Technology for the sake of technology doesn't help anybody. But we
True.
have access to these things in Africa. I mean, we have technology here, but we're not
Mm.
using it for anything useful. We're not creating solutions for people, for communities, for the environment. And that's what needs to be done. So, this
Yeah,
is what
100%.
I'm trying to facilitate. We want people to think of these things in a different way, instead of creating all these fantastic things that, are awesome to look at, but like you've got people next door starving. How can we use
Yeah.
technology to fix things?
Yeah, I think it's a very that's a really important question, or a really important statement that you've made, is how do we use these that's a question. How do we use these technologies to, close the gap? And really conscious leadership is one of the starting points.
Mm.
Um it's conscious leadership. We need to just say, in as much as we want to get involved and keep track, and honestly, speaking as Africans, we need to keep track of the fourth industrial revolution. But how do we make sure that it meets what we need? Even as we go forward. And it means we have to go back to the human. We have to go back to thinking consciously about the human. So yeah, there's quite a lot of work, but I think what's great is being able to start the conversation.
Yes.
It needs to have that start.
Yeah, I think, just changing the perspective of what is expected. I mean, people in Europe or the United States or other Asian countries don't have the same problems we have, or they have technology, they have these ideas of where the fourth industrial revolution is going, but we have a different context here. We have different problems to solve, and we're going to have a different way of thinking about things. So we can't
Yeah,
just, a lot of ventures and startups are coming here trying to bring their models in here to start things in Africa, but like, we need
100%,
to start things here ourselves in our way, with
100%,
our story and our context and our culture.
100%.
And I think that awareness is the biggest start. Yeah. Okay, so we discussed a lot of different topics, different things. I think it was very, very interesting conversation. I'm glad we connected. And I think, one thing
Definitely.
before we close the session, I want to know from you, your perspective, what do you envision for the future of Africa?
Oh, that's a big one. Um, I think for me, what I envision is an inclusive Africa. And what that means for me is, one, Africans have access to what they need to be able to solve the problems that they currently face. Africans have the platform to be able to share their stories without having to come across, or without having to feel like their story is smaller than someone else's story, but instead look at it and say that my life and my journey and my experience in itself is a contribution to the bigger story of Africa. My vision really is seeing the next generation of African leaders consciously developing Africa in a way that Africa sustains itself, in a way that Africa teaches everyone else around Africa, about consciousness, about, authenticity, about learning to live in community, learning to build one another. And I think the reason for me is because it's something I've seen. It's not as if this is something I've not seen. This is something that exists in small communities. And I think if it can be done in a small community, um, especially in like your rural areas, they do this so well. Why can it not be done in the whole continent? And that's one question, and also a challenge really I have to the next set of leaders is one, you also don't need to be in a position of a high title to lead. You just must be willing to listen more to the people that you're serving and what they need. So I really do believe that the future of Africa is going to be filled with conscious leaders, not necessarily based on title, but just based on cause and wanting to advance Africa, Africa's people, and actually teaching the world what being African is like. Like, we're colorful, we're extremely beautiful. We are, I think our food assortment is so amazing. You can go to different parts of Africa and you will have different types of food as you go along. And I think all of that is worth sharing. All of that is worth showing off, and not showing off to say I'm better than the next person, but showing off to say that, come, let me invite you into my home and you get to experience my world and my life. And I can learn from you as well. And that's the future I see for Africa. And I really, if I get to see that day, that'll be amazing. But I'm willing to put in the work in the little spaces that I'm in to at least say that everyone here is from different walks of life, but we all come together for one cause.
100%. I really, really like what you say. We're all doing our little bit even if we don't get to see the end result, we are putting in that work now, for the next generation. It's like planting a seed for a tree that you're never going to sit in the shade of, you know.
100%.
So yeah, we're doing this, we're creating this space, we're creating these conversations, we are doing little bits and pieces, giving of ourselves, so people can learn to value their Africanness and let that become something for the future. I think that's the
Definitely.
most important thing. And thank you
Definitely.
so much for contributing to this. You are doing awesome work. I love your podcast, or your rawcast, as you
Ah,
call it. I'm
thank
going to share those
so.
links in the comments so people can
Thank you
listen to
very
that as
much.
well.
Thank you, and also thank you for letting me be episode number one. I think that's if I knew this was the first episode, I was probably gonna have the jitters and be like, "Oh my goodness, what I have to do." But I was looking so excited. I was so excited to actually have this. You have no idea. And like physically, I'm not in the best shape for the past 2 days because my body's just been like trying to fight me. So I've been pumping myself with lots of warm water, lemon and ginger. But I was like, no, I want to show up today, and I want to make sure that whatever I do say is really my truth. And thank you for this platform. Thank you for what you're doing, the work you've already done, and also being able to just become so selfless in what you're doing and saying that, what, I want Africa to be acknowledged, and I want to help, given the skills, given what you've learned across the world. You're not copying and pasting, but what you're saying is that Africans are able to. We just need to show other Africans that it's possible and inspire them. For me, I always say inspired to inspire. So I'm inspired by you so that I can inspire others, and the chain goes on, and hopefully the rest of Africa can jump onto the same bandwagon where it's this interconnectedness of inspiration.
Yeah, you inspire me as well. I mean, that's why you're here, right? I'm
Oh,
calling all the people that like really
what?
resonate with me. Your work interests me. Yeah, so I'm really glad we got to meet finally. And have this
Pleasure is all
conversation.
mine.
There was so many treasures in these words that you said, shared with me, and I'm happy to share that with everybody else. And I really, hope this reaches a lot of people, because these conversations need to be heard and spread.
Definitely. I definitely do agree with it. And the more we have of them with different people of different walks in the world, I think it it allows more people to come out and actually
Yeah,
say that I've experienced this too, and I have a story to tell, and it just continues. So thank you again. This has been awesome. This is amazing. You are so great. Like you've got this beautiful calming spirit, man. It's like, wow.
oh, thank you.
Just like, oh my goodness. Like it's such a nice, like you see with me, I'm like a happy-go-lucky person. I don't have so much energy, I'm bursting with it. But you've got this natural stillness, calmness. You're like, if I could liken you to any part of nature, you're like a whispering wind.
Oh,
You
that's
know,
the
you
sweetest
can
thing I've ever
feel
heard.
it. You can feel the power of the wind, right? But it can become so strong and move you, but also at the same time it can cool you down. So there's a lot that I've just got through this interaction, and even through your LinkedIn posts. And I think keep doing the amazing work that you're doing. And I believe that you have started something that a lot of people are going to run with, and it's going to spread across the world.
I'm hoping that, just to ignite that fire for everybody to do their own bit, and just spread that. That's all I need for my fulfillment. So thank
Oh,
you for being
that's
a part of
beautiful.
that.
Thank you as well for inviting me.